Welcome back. This is Bible Geometry number 2, where we're looking at what the King James Bible calls the Tabernacle. Depending on what translation you have, your Bible may or may not call it a tabernacle. And personally, I'm suspicious of Latin words creeping into our Bible, and that word tabernacle is from the Latin word taberna, which means a house or a booth or a dwelling place, and in fact is where we get our word tavern, as in a tavern house, which is also called a public house or a pub. So there's something about this structure that is common to all the people about it. It doesn't belong to anyone so much as it belongs to everyone. But as I understand it, the English word for it is a booth, which in the Hebrew is beth, meaning a house. So we can think of this as, for a time, God's house. Tabernacle is one of those words that has always sounded weird to me, but it just means a tent. And in a lot of Bible translations, it's called the tent of meeting. Other terms, like tabernacle of congregation, gives the same idea. And going forward, looking at these numbers that are found in our solar system, for example, the way I see the tabernacle and Solomon's temple is that they represent half of the fulfillment of this thing, which I hope to explain as we go along. Many of the dimensions given will need to be doubled in order to get the numbers that we recognize, the numbers that we've been over from them. This is a theme in the Bible that things God intends to fulfill, which means fill to the full, he sometimes takes a long time to fill, or fills a quarter the way, then a half the way. As such, there are many prototypes of the finalized, revealed type towards the end of the story. A good example of that is the stone kingdom from Daniel. It grows to fill the whole earth, like Isaiah says, as a plant. So these things may happen very slowly. I don't want to get sidetracked from that idea I just said, that the tabernacle represents halfway. Starting in this presentation and going all the way on to New Jerusalem, there will be slides that have many calculations on them of area and volume. If you would be so kind, please check my work and make sure that I have them all correct. I was poring over these measurements and doing math for a lot of days in a row to make these things, and in the nature of these things, there's plenty of mistakes to be made. I don't want to present wrong information, but somehow the gremlins get in these things, and there may be a calculation that's gone awry. So please, in the deeper study of these things, do the math for yourself. I've rechecked some of these things many times, and some of them I have not. So I beg your pardon for anything that slipped past my checking. So let's look at Moses' measurements. Exodus chapter 26, verse 2. The length of the curtain shall be 28 cubits, and the breadth of one curtain 4 cubits, and every one of the curtains shall have one measure. As we've been over, 1 Hebrew cubit is 18 inches, which is 1.5 feet, which is half of a yard. 3.52 Hebrew cubits make up a pace, 440 Hebrew cubits make a furlong, and multiplied by 1,000, we get 3,520 Hebrew cubits in 1 mile. And we'll come to see when we get into Ezekiel's city that one of Ezekiel's reeds is 7.04 Hebrew cubits. We may see that in these tabernacle measurements as well. And let's not forget the purpose that these measurements are given for. Or you might want to ask yourself, what was the purpose of this structure? Well, in chapter 25 of Exodus, God says to Moses, "Let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them, according to all that I show thee, after the pattern of the tabernacle, and the pattern of all the instruments thereof, even so shall ye make it." We discussed this pattern of things in the heavens that were purified in Hebrews 9 in our first presentation. But this is a sanctuary for the purpose that God may dwell among Israel. This is a constant idea that you can track across the Bible, ending in the very last chapter of the Bible. So let's not forget that. This is what the measures are for. Once again, I love looking at pictures, artists' representations of this thing through the years. There's all kinds of imaginations that have been worked on this thing, because the Hebrews didn't have cameras, unfortunately. And as far as I know, this Messiah's Mansion is affiliated from or supported by the Seventh-day Adventists, and from what I've heard, they put on a pretty good show. They come and set up a type of the tabernacle and have a, essentially, small tour and seminar on what they call, rightly so, the gospel in symbols. I don't think I could have put that better myself. I won't offer my opinions on the Seventh-day Adventist, but I will say that this is something you don't want to miss, and you'll probably have an opportunity to see it sometime soon as they go all over the place. So see if you can Google around and find their website. They tour all year. Here's another artist's interpretation of this thing. And I like this one because it has the compass on the ground there among the tents, showing that the opening and entrance to the courtyard face the east. And I think this graphic gets it correct as well. A pattern for worship. That's what we're looking at here, isn't it? A pattern? And they have it in a 5-step encounter here. And notice what happens as you enter the courtyard on the right side of the picture. You're presented with the altar of burnt offering and then the laver. And the symbolism here we can already start to see. Fire and water are presented as being a square and a circle. How about that? This is a cutaway of the inside, and unfortunately it's very low resolution. Not even I can make out much of that. Maybe your display does it some more justice. But I can see the form of cherubim on those curtains in the back. That's kind of interesting. So to catch us up to speed, at this point in the story, Israel has freshly left Egypt and come to the encampment at Mount Sinai. You can read from chapter 19 on to 24, where this slide picks up what's happened so far. God says, I intend to make you, Israel, my special people, and here's what I'm offering. The people agree to the covenant that God makes with them. Moses gives the law, and they say, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do and be obedient. So that's where we're at right now. Chapter 24, verse 4, And Moses wrote all the words of the Lord, and rose up early in the morning, and builded an altar under the hill, and 12 pillars according to the 12 tribes of Israel. Mountains are often used in folk stories as a place of contacting what you could simply say as the divine. People go into the mountains to have revelations, of course. Verse 9, Then went up Moses, Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and they saw the God of Israel. And there were under his feet as if it were a paved work of sapphire stone, and as it were the body of heaven in his clearness. And upon the nobles of the children of Israel he laid not his hand. Also they saw God, and did eat and drink. This is a kind of revelation, but instead of looking up to the heaven itself, the author here is looking down at the ground, a paved work under the feet of God, that is as the body of heaven. Of course, we're given some numbers here. Already we've encountered 12 and 70. On in verse 12, the Lord said unto Moses, Come up to me into the mount, and be there, and I will give thee tables of stone, and a law and commandments which I have written, that thou mayest teach them. And Moses rose up, and his minister Joshua, and Moses went up into the mount of God. So we started building that altar under the hill, at the base of it, and to have this revelation and be given the law and the commandments, we have to, in this story, go up to God. Moses here is, well, elevating his learning to see what God has written and what he must teach his people. Now verse 15 says, And Moses went up into the mount, and a cloud covered the mount, and the glory of the Lord abode upon Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it 6 days. And the 7th day he called unto Moses out of the midst of the cloud, and the sight of the glory of the Lord was like a devouring fire on the top of the mount in the eyes of the children of Israel. And Moses went into the midst of the cloud, and gat him up to the mount, and Moses was in the mount 40 days and 40 nights. A common numerical theme in the Bible is this division of 6 days and 7. We see that the cloud of the Lord's glory is covering the mount for 6 days before Moses is called up. Taking further note of that, I'd advise you to read in Mark chapter 9, which says in verse 2, After 6 days Jesus taketh with him Peter and James and John, and leadeth them up into a high mountain apart by themselves, and he was transfigured before them. So in that story, and especially with the events that transpired before it, there is something significant about this waiting 6 days and journeying up into the mount on the 7th day. Perhaps that's something else we can look into at a later time. And when we saw the sun measurements, we went over that 40 days and 40 nights is 3,456 seconds. So we have that 3456 number in there. And I'd like to discuss what Sinai means. In different parts of the Bible, you'll see this mount referred to as Mount Horeb. That's Rather interesting, the Mesopotamian or Babylonian god of the moon was Sin, assuming I'm pronouncing that correctly. So this is Mount Sinai, or the mountain of the moon goddess. But Horeb, the word carries with it this idea of being very dry or very bright in terms of being hot. That's very interesting to me that this mountain has two names, one referring to the moon and one referring to the sun. Chapter 25 is where we begin to measure. And they shall make an ark of shittim wood, 2 cubits and a half shall be the length thereof, and a cubit and a half the breadth thereof, and a cubit and a half the height thereof. Notice as we continue that the ark and the tent that it is in are of one proportion. As I've said, there are many different numbers associated with this depending on what measure you're using, and as we go along I'm going to present them all. They will all be on your screen for your information, but I may only talk about the ones that seem the most significant in my eyes. And here's a good example. The length is given as 2.5 cubits, and 45 is an interesting number there when we come to all the mentions of 450 that we're going to see before the end of this thing. But 125 is the most significant there because 125 paces are in a furlong. The width was 27 inches, which is 9 by 3, and the height the same. There's the area given. And keep in mind, when we're measuring area, we're not measuring in cubits anymore, we're measuring in square cubits, and there is a very big difference. And the perimeter of this thing, or around the outside edge, is very significant. It is 12 feet, which is 144 inches. And there at the bottom, the volume is given. What import these numbers might have, I have not been enlightened with yet. How about the cover of the ark? And thou shalt make a mercy seat of pure gold, 2 cubits and a half shall be the length thereof, and a cubit and a half the breadth thereof. And thou shalt put the mercy seat above upon the ark, and in the ark thou shalt put the testimony that I shall give thee. And there I will meet with thee, and I will commune with thee from above the mercy seat, from between the two cherubim, which are on the ark of the testimony, of all the things which I will give thee in commandment unto the children of Israel. There's a lot going on here, and if you would like to learn some things about this mercy seat and why it is called a propitiation in the book of Hebrews, you can reach out to me to get my notes on that. But this is the seat from whence God will commune with Moses and later the high priest. It's no surprise that it's the same size of the box that it covers. The dimensions are the same as seen here. And thou shalt also make a table of shittim wood, 2 cubits shall be the length thereof, and a cubit the breadth thereof, and a cubit and a half the height thereof, and thou shalt set upon the table showbread before me alway. Isn't that what Jesus calls himself, the bread of life? 2 cubits is 3 feet, which is 36 inches, and exactly 1 yard. There's our friend 36 showing up again. Of course, the width is half of that. The height of the table, 27 inches, we see again. Now the area in inches is quite significant. 648 inches. That is the number that was associated with one season of the great year, which was 6,480 years. Now the perimeter around this thing would have been 9 feet, which is 108 inches. Remember that 1,080 miles constitutes the radius of our moon. Not to say that 6 cubits is insignificant in itself, given that reference there to creation. Keeping with this idea of 6 and 7, the instructions for the candlestick say, and thou shalt make a candlestick of pure gold, of beaten work shall the candlestick be made. His shaft and his branches, his bowls and his knops and his flowers shall be of the same. And 6 branches shall come out of the sides of it, and 3 branches of the candlestick out of the one side, and 3 branches of the candlestick out of the other side. And thou shalt make the 7 lamps thereof, and they shall light the lamps thereof, that they may give light over against it. And look that thou make them after their pattern which was showed thee in the mount. The covering of the tent, chapter 26. Moreover, shalt thou make the tabernacle with 10 curtains of fine twined linen. The length of one curtain shall be 28 cubits, and the breadth of one curtain 4 cubits. Now keep in mind there the number 28 is a really good average for a moon cycle. The length of the curtain would be 42 feet, or 504 inches, which we'll get to the significance of 504 in just a moment. The width of a curtain is 6 feet, or 72 inches, and we've seen that number come up a lot. The area of the thing, which I don't recognize any of these numbers besides in square yards, it comes back to 28 again. And there is the perimeter of one of these linen curtains. Now here's the significance of 504 when we see it. The radius of the Earth and the radius of the Moon put together equal that 5040. But speaking about halving and quartering things, go ahead and try that with the number 5040. You can read in Daniel and in Revelation chapter 11 and 12, of the 3.5 times prophecy. Chapter 11 and 12 explain that 3.5 times is 1,260 years. If you double that, you get 2,520, which would be 7 times, clearly revealing that a prophetic time is 360 years. But if we double that to 14 times, we get 5,040 years, or days, depending on how you want to take that. So in prophecy, when you see that 1260, know that that is a quarter of 5040, is a representation of the moon-earth relationship. The 11 curtains of goat's hair. And thou shalt make curtains of goat's hair to be a covering upon the tabernacle. 11 curtains shalt thou make, the length of one curtain shall be 30 cubits, and the breadth of one curtain 40 cubits. And thou shalt couple 5 curtains by themselves, and 6 curtains by themselves, and shalt double the 6th curtain in the forefront of the tabernacle. Well, 30 cubits, we come to 45 feet, which is 540 inches. And in the width, we see again 72. The area is 120 square cubits, which is of course an Israelite number, but our number there in square inches is of some import. We'll discuss that in a moment. And a perimeter. I can't confess that I recognize any of those numbers. But have a look at this. 54 is half of 108. So whenever we see that number, 54, come up in the measures in the tabernacle and in the temple later, we'll know that we're talking about basically half a moon. Of course, 72 doubled is 144. And have a look at that square inches in area. We get 77,760. And that was a number we found in our seasonal measurements, which is 144 away from being 7920. I'll bring it up again when we look at Ezekiel's city, but I think it's very clear what these numbers are talking about. But seeing as I haven't been educated on the language of numbers like these ancient people may have been, I can tell what they're talking about, but not what they're saying about it, which is part of my curiosity in all of this Bible geometry. The boards and sockets, this is quite a lengthy paragraph, so I'll let you read it on its own, but just notice that there are 40 sockets, given our Bible trial number there, and also westward thou shalt make 6 boards. Well, we've seen all the numbers that these calculations come to already, but I will point out that the 8 corner boards are in the exact configuration of Ezekiel's sacrifice tables, and the total length comes to 144 inches or 12 feet. The altar, and thou shalt make an altar of shittim wood, 5 cubits long and 5 cubits broad. The altar shall be 4 square, and the height thereof shall be 3 cubits. You can probably see where these calculations are going. 5 cubits is 90 inches. And the height of 3 cubits is 54 inches. Keep in mind that that is half of 108. You can see the area given here. Once again, I don't really recognize any of these numbers, but the perimeter is the remarkable thing here. Around the outside of this bronze altar, which is, as it says, 4 square, is 360 inches. Given that it is a square, the sum of the interior angles of the thing is also 360 degrees. I don't think that was done accidentally, and there is the volume for your use as well. This would be the environs around the tent itself. And thou shalt make the court of the tabernacle. The length of the court shall be 100 cubits, and the breadth 50 everywhere, and the height 5 cubits of fine twined linen, and their sockets of brass. Notice that even the courtyard obeys the same setup as the ark, tabernacle itself, and the things surrounding the tabernacle. Wheels within wheels, I wonder what that means. This will be a thing that is said redundantly when we get to Ezekiel's city. And for the gate of the court shall be a hanging of 20 cubits. Let's look at those numbers. The courtyard is 100 cubits, which is 1,800 inches long, and half that in width, a tenth of that in height, and in area, there it is. Once again, I can't say that I recognize any of those numbers, except for the 125 there on the end. I've made so many connections with these other numbers that I'm sure that there's some place in our natural world where I just haven't been educated as to what the thing refers to, though I wouldn't be surprised if we found it in music or other measures of the solar system yet hidden from me. For the perimeter around, though, we do come back to 5,400. How about that? That is a very common number we've been seeing in the Tabernacle. And if you've ever wanted to know the volume of the courtyard of the Tabernacle in cubic inches, there you go. Now you can impress all your friends at Bible Trivia Night. But I jest. It is 1,458,000,000 cubic inches. And the gate, anybody want to take a guess? There we see it is 360 inches. Once you see my presentations on Ezekiel City and especially the New Jerusalem, you'll see that these earlier structures in the Bible are of the same form as them, but they use a different numerical dialect than the later ones. Of course, things like 54 and 360 and 12 and 144 appear in those later measures, but they appear at different rates as compared to Solomon's Temple and the Tent of Meeting. And we talked a little bit about the encampment, but just to refresh your memory, this was the stayings of the tribe around the tabernacle itself, which was in the middle. This is from the Bet Aleph synagogue at the foot of Mount Gilboa. Apparently it's from the 6th century, but the mosaic got it exactly right. A lion, a man, an ox, and a scorpion, though we know that is an eagle, the 12-part zodiacal clock, and the 4 living creatures around what I assume to be God there in the center, as well as discs or maybe wheels at his feet. There's a lot of symbolism going on here, and some of it is right on. But we can see already by the 6th century these zodiacal signs were well known. Here we have an artist's interpretation, which I assume is Catholic, given that they have changed the man or cherubim out for a depiction of Mary. But it is a 12-part clock, numbers 1 through 12 around the exterior, and then coming in with the rainbow and the 4 living beings. I don't know if that golden plate in the middle is meant to be an offering table, but it has an open book with a lamb in it, giving us this same layout of the encampment of the tribes. And then lastly, to point you to our zodiac itself, I want to remind you that God said that he would dwell in the midst of the children of Israel. These 4 signs are a representation of the camp of Israel and the heads of their brigade. There are, of course, space in our whole zodiac for all 12 tribes. But before we get to Ezekiel's city, just brainstorm a little bit about what it means for God to be in the midst, or what I'm taking that as, in the center of this arrangement. I don't think that the ears of corn in the cardinal directions are any accident either in this image. Again, thank you for watching, and it is my hope that this was edifying to you in your journeying through the Bible. Next time we will be looking at the next structure in Bible measure, which is Solomon's Temple. We'll also see some time measures in that, and a look at the dimensions of Solomon's house, and what a marvelous depiction is given. We'll pick it up there next time.